G'day, welcome to Pay It Forward. I've got a new project for you all today, and it is a little helper for your workroom, a little donkey sewing caddy. He's made up in fabrics and felt, very simple and quick to make up. Of course, I have a free pattern for you. All you need to do is click on the link in the description below, download your free templates, and I'm going to take you through it every step of the way. So let's talk about the things we're going to need to make this little donkey caddy. So the first thing you're going to need are your front and back pieces. Now they are cut from felt fabric, which is felt fused with heat and bond to a piece of cotton. Quilting cotton will be fine. I do have a video that shows you how to prepare your felt in this way, and it will show you all of the different concepts that I use today. So this one is felt fabric. You've got a back and a front section. Then you need your little base piece, which is interfaced, just with a fusible woven interfacing. You need your two head pieces. They also have fusible woven interfacing. You'll also need something for a little tail. Now I've used just normal wool or yarn, and I have just made up beforehand, put a little knot in the end. I've got 9 strands there. And I've done just a normal 3-way plait and kept that braid quite flat, and then I've tied a little knot in the end. I'll give you the measurement that needs to extend when we pop that one in, but that just gives it a nice little, it's a little flat feel. It's got a little bit more substance, but it still sews into the seam really well. You're also going to need your pieces for your face. These all have heat and bond applied to the back. So you have your muzzle piece, you have your 2 little eye pieces, and you have your ear pieces. And the ear pieces are marked with a top and a bottom so that you'll know which way they go. So they will all be pressed on. You'll also need 2 little suitable buttons, nice and flat ones, for the little nostrils. And you're going to need some eyes. Now it's up to you whether you use little tiny buttons. Use little black buttons. We're going to give him a bit of a sort of a looking upward sorrowful look, so the buttons need to be quite small in black. Otherwise you can do what I'm doing, and I'm using some little safety eyes there, and these are 6mm. Of course you need your little clamps. We also need a slightly larger button to join the head to the body. It doesn't matter whether that's 2-hole or 4-hole. Then we're going to need our little pieces cut for our little saddle bags. Now these pieces are cut from double felt. Again, you can check out my video on how to prepare your felt. That is just 2 pieces of felt joined together with heat and bond. And I like to make that one in 2 colours. You don't have to, but I like to have that little underneath colour showing. And from the same piece of felt, we also cut 2 little pockets. So I've just got the one there which I've already sewn, which I'll be showing you. And then you need your little flower, also cut from double felt. Again, I've made it 2 different colours. Choose something that coordinates with your little project, and you'll need a little button for centering there. You'll also need a little bit of black, something like pearl thread. There's a few options for the little bit of hair that we give him. If you do have a little scrap of black fur, that would be awesome. You can add that. I'm just going to show you a simple way to add a few strands of hair. You'll also need some embroidery thread, or what I have, a fine pearl thread here, to do your blanket stitching around your little saddle bags. We're going to be filling, partially filling our little donkey with something weighty, something dry and weighty. I just use rice. Dried rice works really well. You may have the proper pellets, stuffing pellets. A lovely lady did leave in the comments, mention that you can fill these little pincushion style projects with apparently crushed walnuts, I'm told. Is fabulous, and you can get those, get a bag of those on Amazon. Apparently they're crushed very fine and they're very good for your pins. They keep them sharp and stop rust. Thank you for that tip, that was awesome. And we need a little bit of polyester filling. So really that's it. So our first step, let's move all this out of the way, and we're going to start where we start, which is on the front and back pieces. So we're going to put right sides together. You can make this little donkey up just in felt. So you can make it up just in interfaced felt. I just like using a little bit of fabric in the project because it just gives you that breakup of colour. So right sides together, and we're going to be sewing those two side seams. Now you have marks on your pattern pieces. You see there's your start of your sewing line, and that's the finish of your sewing line. On both sides we leave this top edge open. Seam allowance is 4mm, as it is in most of my patterns. You'll have worked that out by now. And we just line all those up. You can clip it if you like with your little clips or pins, and we just start at that little mark, and we're going to sew straight down with a 4mm seam allowance to the base, and then we're going to do the same with the other side down to the base here, and we leave the bottom open. Now as we sew these seams, we're going to incorporate our little tail into that seam, and the amount that extends from your seam is around about 12 to 13 centimeters. So it's just a little piece. It doesn't matter if it's longer, it doesn't matter if it's shorter, but I think around about 12 or 13 just sits nicely. And it's just a matter of popping that little one into your seam. You've got a little mark made. You should have your little pattern marks there that tell you exactly where to pop that one in. And I'll just be incorporating that one into the seam as I continue on and sew down. There we have my seams all sewn up, and I've incorporated my little tail in there. You can see that one's just popping out there. And I've also just taken my pinking shears and just notched those little curves. If you don't have pinking shears, you can just clip those little curves. Just gives it a nice rounded finish when we turn it through. So our next step is to add our base piece. Push that little tail right out of the way. And we're going to just finger press open those two little seams, just so that's nice and flat, and we can get our pins straight through those little center seams there. And you'll see on your pattern piece that you will have on your base pattern piece, remember it's right sides together, you've got your little marks. So these are your center marks, and they line up with those two seams. So I like to put my pin straight through that center mark, and it's the same on both sides. And then I'm going to put my pin straight through that center seam at a 4mm seam allowance, just the same as the rest of the project, and we push that pin right the way down. And again, you might have seen me do putting these sorts of little gussets in. It's all about the pinning. Sewing is quite easy once you master the pinning. So now we're going to take our pin. On one side we're going to go through both layers, flip that one over, take a little bit of fabric on the side and push that pin head all the way down. And we're going to do the same on the other side so that we know that that end is nicely anchored in. So the pin goes through both layers, flip it over, take a little on the side, push your pin right the way down. Then we're going to turn it round, and we're going to do the same on the other side. So your pin goes through the center seam, through the center mark, then it goes through the center of that seam. And I know that these things can seem a little tricky when you first start doing them, but really after you've done a few, it's just a matter of knowing the method, and then you really can't go wrong. I'm going to be sewing this seam, this little base piece in, using a stab back stitch. I do have a video on the stab back stitch. It tells you and shows you exactly how to do that one. It's the best stitch for hand sewing, and it's the best stitch for sewing in a little gusset piece like this. It's a bit like a teddy bear's foot really, and that's how we do that in the teddy bear world. So again, we're just going to be through both layers. The important part is the pin head goes all the way down, because then it stops you getting too caught up on those little pins when you're sewing. You could possibly sew this one in on the machine, but you would have to tack it in place first, which is what I do. So then it's just a matter of going around and pinning the rest of that little base piece in just as you did those. So there you can see I've pinned that one all in place, and little donkey will actually stand up, so it's actually pinned into the position that it will be, which makes it much easier. Now I'm just going around. You'll need an extra strong thread to be sewing this little base in, and I'm using my Gutermann extra strong thread, and I'm just sewing an overcasting stitch. My reason for doing that is that then I can get rid of all of those pins, and then whichever way you choose to sew that seam in, to sew that base in properly, it just makes it easier. You're not battling around pins. So you see that little very simple overcasting stitch I'm doing. It's just quick and easy, and I can take my pins out as I go. You can see there that I've got that little base just tacked in there with that stitch, and I started my little stab back stitch, and I'm going to work that little stitch right the way around the entire base. As I said, it's up to you how you sew that one in. It will go under the machine, but these little ends are best hand sewn in, so perhaps you can machine the sides and then just do those little ends just by hand. Check out my video on how to sew the stab back stitch, and that will show you how to do that one there. And once our base is all sewn in, we can just turn that little one through our top opening. Here is our little donkey body all turned through, and I have rolled out those seams very well and all around the base there, so those seams are nicely pushed out. And so now we're just going to fill this little body up until about the widest portion of him with rice. So it's just a matter of adding your rice a little bit at a time. And we settle the rice down as we go. So I'll try and do this without making a huge mess. And it really is just about each time you add some more rice, you settle it in. And you tap it and you settle it in. You can be using your knitting needle to pack that rice right in. We want it to get into every corner of that little base there. So keep adding your rice to about that section there, and then we just top up the rest right up to the top here with our polyester filling. You can see that little body's packed in there nice and tight, and my filling goes all the way up to the top. You'll find a wool felting needle is very handy for just tucking those little fibres in. We do want that to be nice and firm so that when we're using it, we're going to be putting pins in and so on. And the trick to getting that base nice and flat is that the whole time that you're filling that little donkey body, you keep it flat on your work surface. And once we've got those fibres just tucked in nicely there, then we're going to take our needle and we're going to come in, we're going to go tie a knot in the base. I'm using my extra strong thread again. You can use a pearl thread, whatever works, coordinates with your project again. And I've come out between right on that seam there, and I'm just going to sew those two sections together with a blanket stitch. You can pop a little clip in there if you like as you go, and we will just blanket stitch around that whole top edge just to close that one off. If you haven't done a blanket stitch before, just have a look at my video that shows you how to sew the blanket stitch, and it will show you in great detail. Now we have our opening all nice and closed. That's our little body all finished, and we can set that one aside and we can start work on our little head. So you take a front piece of your head, and we're going to take this one to our iron, use a protective cloth, and we're going to remove those backing papers and press on our little muzzle piece, our two eye pieces, and our little ear pieces. The little ear pieces are marked with a T that show you where the top is on your pattern piece, and it's the straight edge that goes towards the inside. And the little curved edge matches up with the curve of his ear. Now remember, when you're pressing those pieces on, we're going to be sewing a blanket stitch around the outside of the top of the head and those ears, so make sure you leave room for that little blanket stitch. Refer to your pattern templates for your placement of your eyes, and get those pressed on, and then we're going to take that piece to the machine, and we're going to sew each of those pieces on. Now the muzzle piece is just along that top edge there, and I like to use a coordinating thread. The same with the little eye pieces. It's very close to the edge around each of the eyes. You can hand sew these on with a blanket applique stitch if you would prefer, and the little earpieces get sewn on in exactly the same way. My little face pieces are all nicely stitched in place there, and now we're going to add some hair. Now previously I said if you happen to have a little piece of black fur, you could actually put a little triangle section in there and stitch that down or glue that down there. However, I'm just using some pearl thread here. You can see that I've just made a little line to the top of, from the very center of the head, just a little way down. It's only about 2.5 centimeters. That is marked on your pattern, and that is for your hair. Now what I do is I get my pearl thread and I have it doubled, and I've got my big knot at the end, and all I'm going to do is come in behind there at the very bottom on that first little mark, and I'm going to pull that one through. That knot is going to hold that one there, and I'm going to snip. Now I'm going to snip it longer than I'm going to need it. Then I'm going to make another knot, and I'm going to do the same thing a little bit further up. I'll just move that little knot out of the way. So just above, exactly the same thing, and I'm just going to trim them all to about the same length. Now you can see what I'm doing there. I'm just making a little line, and it's just a few strands of black thread, but it really does, it makes a big difference, gives it that real little donkey look. Now you can go right up to the top there. Remember, we're going to be sewing a blanket stitch around that edge. It's about 4 millimeters, so I finish about just below that there. Now you can go on and add a second line either side of that if you like, just to add some extra. See how you go, and I will do that, and I'll have a look at it and then leave them long, and we will trim them later. So you can see there's just enough hair there to just give a little impression of a little tuft there. Now if you're going to be using buttons for your eyes, just give you a little side sweep there. Now is the time to add those, and I like to make them looking upwards and a little together. Little quizzical look there. So you can sew those on now if you're using buttons. I'm going to be using my safety eyes, and I will apply them after I've sewn the little head pieces together. So next step now is to do exactly that, and sew our back of our head to the front, and you can see that those line up beautifully, and you can just clip those into place. And we're going to be sewing, you've got marks on your pattern pieces there. We're going to be sewing just from the base. Make sure it is very well lined up, because we need those ears to be lined up. And you're just going to be sewing that same 4 millimeter seam allowance from this mark right round the bottom of the head up until this mark. You can see I have my little eyes in place now, my little safety eyes in place, and I've sewn that little seam and turned that one through, pushed out and rolled out those seams again, as I always do. And now we're just going to fill this little head. And because it's just a 2-piece head, it's actually quite easy to fill out, and we give it a sort of a flat sort of a look rather than a really full look, so we don't overfill this little head, but we do want to mark out that little bottom section. So you can see that I'm just pushing it all the way down to the bottom and supporting that little seam as I do that, and we're going to fill that one right up to the top here the ears will be glued into place, and we'll be closing that opening. So just fill that one right up to the top. So we filled out our little head enough to just plump that one out. It's reasonably firm, but we're going to be adding our little nostrils after we've finished the entire head, and we want enough give in that little section there that when we sew those nostrils on, we're going to be able to pull them in just a little bit. So that's one of the last things that we do. So we don't want it so firm that it won't pull in like that. You can see there that I filled right up to the top. Use your felting needle again. It'll help you just keep those fibres in place. And our next step is we'll need some clear craft and fabric glue. And we're just going to glue those ears together on each side. So it's just about applying some glue. So across the base of the ear there, because we want that all held into place, and the whole back section of that ear. Make sure you get right to the edges. And I like to do one at a time. And then we're just going to glue the front earpiece to the back, making sure to line them all up. The clear craft glue is great for this because you can just slip that into place. Don't worry if you've got a couple of edges that are a little bit uneven, because we can always trim those. The important corner is this one, the inside head corner. We want to really clamp that one down, and that's where your little clips will come in really handy if you've got them. So I like to get a clip right in that one, in that section, to hold that one closed. Just make sure they're really pressed well together. And you can see that line across there is nicely glued into place. So pop your clips all the way around that little ear, and then we'll do exactly the same with the other side. My little ears are all dried now, so I have my needle thread with a pearl thread, and I'm just going to use black. You can use whichever colour you like. I like the black because it sort of marks out the top of those ears and the top of the head. And so I've gone in through the top of the head, I've got a knot on the end, and I've just come out between those two layers of the ear. And I'm now going to sew a little blanket stitch around the entire edge of each ear. I'm going to pull that one across. You can pop a clip in there. Just to show you. And I'm going to blanket stitch across the top of the head, right round the other ear and down to this side. Now if you are not familiar with a blanket stitch, I've got a video that shows you how to do that one. The one that I'm going to be doing is probably only about 3 millimeters. We start right at the base here, blanket stitch goes through both layers, and your needle comes out through the loop. So I'll just work that stitch right the way around. So there we go, all our stitching finished, and he's had a little haircut. Just trim him off. I like him just a little bit untidy. And I've added my little nostril buttons. And you can see that we add them at the end because we can pull them in. They're just stitched in from behind there. And now our next step is to add that little head to our body. So we need our little button. So it's just probably it's about a 20 millimeter button, I'd say, but it can be a little bigger than that, that's fine. You'll need to make a mark at the back of your head, and it's about halfway. So halfway, just a mark in the center there, and on the back of your little neck section there, you just need your little mark there, and your button will sit right in the center there. And it sits about a centimetre, just over a centimetre from that top stitched edge that you have. So those are our entry points. So the way that we do it is that we have a doll needle and a double thread of extra strong, it must be extra strong thread, and we don't need a knot in the end because we're going to be tying off, but we're going to go in, we're only going to use 2 of the holes if you're using a 4-hole button. We're going to go in through our little button first up, and we're going to go in just one side of our little mark, and make sure that when you're going through that you're going through straight. You don't want that angle to change. You don't want to be going through like this, you don't want to be going through like this. You want to be going through absolutely straight. So line that up, look at it from every angle. And then we're going to pull that one through, and then we're going to go to our little head section, and you can see our little mark there, and we're just going the other side of it, and we're going to take in some of the felt and some of the stuffing. I'm going to travel across a little way, same distance from the other side. You can see I've taken a bite out of that little donkey head there, going right the way through. Now we're going to travel back exactly the same. Still got our button threaded, and we're going to come through see what we've done there. We're going to come through the other side, and we're going to exit through the opposite hole on our button. Pull those threads through, and I can show you exactly how that is. So you can see there, we've got like a little thread joint there that's going to pull that head into place. Pull that one down, and it's a simple matter of tying that little button on very, very tight. Compressing it all as you go. Give it a squeeze, and we'll give it a squeeze this way, and keep pressing and squeezing and pulling that button in till you've got it nice and tight, and then it's just a matter of knotting off those threads 2 or 3 times. And there we have little Donkey's head all attached, and of course because it's on a button we've got a nice little head tilt there that can happen. So the next step and the final step is to make his little saddle bags. So we're going to move on with that. So moving on to our little saddle bags, you should have your saddle bag centerpiece, which just sits over our little donkey's back like that, and it is cut with the double felt, so you can choose whichever colour. So I've cut the pieces out of the same piece of double felt so that I can reverse the little pockets and make them the green. So you should have 2 little pockets, one for each end. Now you can see the first thing that we do is to sew a little blanket stitch along the top edge of each of those little pockets, and I've used just a pearl thread. I've used a variegated one this time just because it matches my little donkey's colours. So that's the first step. So you do that to each little pocket, and then you add your little felt flower. We don't need to do anything to the edges of that flower because it's double felt, and again you can choose whichever colour you like. And before we sew the pockets on, we actually sew that little flower right into the centre using a little button, a little decorative button, something that works also with your colours. So once those are stitched on, you then go ahead and you can clip those little ones into place. course there would be one at the other end also. Make sure that they're lined up and that they're straight. And then it's a simple matter of sewing that same blanket stitch right the way around the entire piece, and it will incorporate those little pockets as you go. And I've got one here that I've already made ahead of time for the sake of time, and so you can see how that little one looks. So once that's all sewn up, those are your little saddlebags. Now, to add them to your little donkey, I don't actually attach mine, I don't sew mine on, I just actually pop those on. But I'll show you a little trick in the way that you can put them on. Because this is double felt and it has that glue inside of those two layers, if you take it back after this stage, take it back to your iron and press that middle section just for a couple of minutes. Remember your protective cloth while it's still warm, which is what we never do. We never move it while it's still warm, but when we want to mold it to something that we're making, then we do. So heat up just that section while it's still warm, we fold it over and we let it sit and we let it cool just like that. And that way it'll sit, it will recool and it will set in that little curved position. So let's just pop it on our little donkey. So there you can see is our little donkey all finished, and his little saddlebags, you see they just sit over the top like that. Now if you want to attach those little saddlebags, you can. There's a couple of ways you can do it. Obviously you can just throw a couple of stitches in there. Alternatively, you can use some little Velcro spots on the bottom of each saddlebag and to his side there, and the same on the other side. But I think that they just sit there nicely. And once you've put a few pins in, if you are using him as a caddy, you'll find that that'll just sit there just well. It doesn't move because it's felt. It has that Velcro kind of effect anyway. And you can fill them up with all of your sewing bits and pieces. And so there is our little donkey all loaded up and ready for work. What a great little gift it would be for a fellow sewer. Awesome. I suppose we need to be thinking about Christmas, don't we? That would really make it a perfect gift. And of course he can be covered in pins, clips, all sorts of bits and pieces. I've added a little bow there. You can do that if you like. It's just a little piece of felt. And I think he's absolutely adorable. Remember him for craft markets. I think that he would do very well. And those little ears, because they've got that heat and bond in there, they're lovely and mouldable. And he can have his little head tilt. I think he's gorgeous. I hope you love him too. Well, thank you all for sewing with me today, making up this little project. I hope you find him useful. If you have enjoyed this video, you could give me a thumbs up. That would be beaut. Follow me on Instagram to see behind the scenes bits and pieces about everything else that I love to do, and talk to me via the comments. I love to hear what you're doing. I love to hear what you would like to see. Give me some ideas for things you would like me to design for you, and I will definitely do my best. In the meantime, make sure that you subscribe because you don't want to miss any of the upcoming little projects. I've got a few more coming up like this little donkey. I'm sure you'll enjoy them all. In the meantime, everybody, if something good comes your way, just pay it forward because we all can. And until next time, it's hooroo from me.